Hey everyone, welcome to Q&A. I am Bill, the company's expert, and today Alexei Chislov writes, can you list the most important job interview questions asked by interviewers? Yeah, certainly I can, Alexei. Let's dive in. Okay, there are 5 standard job interview questions that I feel are by far the most important. And those are, tell me about yourself. Why should we hire you? What is your weakness? What are your salary expectations? And where do you see yourself in 5 years? Those are the most important ones, okay? On top of that, there are 2 behavioral-based questions that are also very important. Tell me about a time you had an accomplishment, and tell me about a time that you experienced a failure or a challenge. Okay? Now, let's dive into these. Okay? First of all, I just want to say, obviously there's a lot more questions than this that you may encounter in a job interview. However, these are by far the most important. If you can learn how to answer these well, then the hard part is done. Okay? Now, let's get into it. Let's start with the first one. Tell me about yourself. Okay, this is the one that recruiters usually ask at the beginning of a job interview. It's usually the icebreaker, okay? And you need to use this question as a vehicle to convey how you meet, or at least speak to, all the requirements. Okay, usually when you have a job posting, they'll list requirements, right? It'll be things like you have to have this education, this experience, these skills, okay? Now, you need to use this question in your answer to communicate to them how you meet each one of those, okay? So you say, I have this experience, I have, these skills. Now, if you don't technically meet it to the letter, at least you're addressing it. You're saying something like, well, okay, I don't have 5 years experience directly in this role, but I do have 2 years of direct experience, but I've also got 6 years experience in this other role over here, which is very, very similar to what this role is. So essentially, I have the experience, and that shouldn't be a concern. Something along those lines. I'm just making this up as I go, but you're speaking to all the requirements, because the whole point of a job interview with a recruiter is for them to make sure that A, you meet the requirements, and B, nothing else is going to be a concern. Okay? So that's what we use this question for. The next question, okay, why should we hire you? It's very similar to tell me about yourself, because when they ask you, why should we hire you, you're going to answer with a bunch of positive things about yourself. Now, if you're dealing with a recruiter, once again, recruiters care primarily about, do you meet the requirements? So the thing you want to convey is that you do, and you want to speak to those requirements. So these 2 questions, these are the most important, because you're going to be explaining to them how you meet everything and nothing's a concern. Okay? I've done separate videos on all of these, so you could dive into those videos to go deeper in how you actually answer some of these. Now, the third one, what is your weakness? Okay? This is the question that they ask to see if you're going to give them a reason for which they can eliminate you. They say, what's your weakness? What are you bad at? What do you hate? What have you done that's like really sucked? And if you just be honest and give them this, horrible thing, you're like, yeah, I hate this. I can't do this. I have real problems with this. That's going to get you eliminated. So the way I suggest that people answer this question is, you could give a trivial weakness, something that isn't related to the job in question, but what I would recommend is that instead you give something that kind of might sound like a weakness, but really it's a strength. Okay? That would be the best way to answer this, in my opinion. The next one, the salary expectations question. What are your salary expectations? They may also ask you, what is your current salary? Okay, sometimes it's illegal to ask that, but in other places it isn't. So it's all part of the same thing. They're wanting to see if the salary that they offer is going to be a concern. It's not going to satisfy you. Okay, so if you're used to getting paid a lot more, or you're expecting to get paid a lot more, that's going to be a concern to them. Okay, so your answer should basically convey that, the salary is no longer it's not a concern. You're going to be happy with it. Okay. Watch my video that I've done specifically on that one to really get into it, because that answer can be complicated. The fifth one, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Okay, this is a question that they ask to see if there's a concern that you're going to be jumping ship if they hire you in the near future. Okay, so if they hire you for a sales job and they say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And you say, oh, well, I hate sales. I see myself spending my whole life doing this other thing. Okay, that's going to be a concern. They'll figure that if they hire you, you'll probably leave shortly after. So, you basically want to alleviate their concerns. I recommend you say something along the lines of, well, I expect that I will be advancing based on my performance. And just keep it at that. Okay, so those are the top 5 standard interview questions. Now we got to talk about behavioral-based questions. For those of you who don't know too much about this, behavioral-based questions are questions where you answer with a story from your past. Okay, so they usually come in the form of, tell me about a time when you did this. Okay, so you answer with a story. So the most common behavioral-based question that you're almost guaranteed to get asked is, tell me about a time that you accomplished something. Okay, tell me about a time that you did something great and you were commended or something like that. Okay. Another very popular type of behavioral question is, tell me about a time that you failed at something. Okay, or you had to overcome a significant challenge. Okay, so these are behavioral-based questions. Now, the way to handle behavioral-based questions is you do some preparation before the interview. Okay, you sit down and you think about 5 positive success stories that you've had from your past. Okay, your 5 most shining moments. Okay, and you have those on the tip of your mind. Okay, and then you also think of 5 failures or 5 challenges that you had to overcome. Okay, think of like examples of that type of situation from your past. Okay, and then you come to the job interview with those 5 stories also on the tip of your mind. Okay, then any type of behavioral based question they ask you, you answer it by pulling out one of these stories, okay, that are fresh in your head. Okay, so if they ask you, a time that you failed at something, I got some ones in my head. So you don't have to think, you don't have to rack your brain to think in the moment when you're nervous. You've already got these. Now, those are the main questions, but I do feel that there's a couple others that are runners-up that deserve some special mention here. Going a little deeper on the behavioral question thing, there's one particular behavioral question that's also very popular, a third type, and that is they ask you about conflict with a previous boss. Okay, so they'll say, tell me about a time that you had an issue following the instructions of a previous boss, or tell me about a time that you weren't able to satisfy the expectations of your previous boss and you got in trouble for it. Okay, questions of that nature are very popular. Okay, the conflict interview question, those are very popular. Okay, so think of a story ahead of time that was of that nature, and you can pull that out. Okay, and it's not too damaging. It's not something that you failed and that was it. It was a time when you had a problem but you overcame it, right? Or you had a problem and you didn't really overcome it that time, but you did learn what to do for future. Okay, and if this is something that happened not last week but in the distant past, that's even better. Okay, another runner-up is the leadership question. Okay, these are very popular, especially if you're going to be in a supervisor position or a management position. These are super important. Okay, what is your leadership style? That type of question. Okay, have an answer for that. It can get complicated, but the answer is largely going to depend on you. Okay, it isn't a cookie cutter type question. And finally, another runner-up, the last runner-up I'm going to mention that deserves special mention is the motivation question. Everybody's favorite. They're going to ask you what motivates you, or what does success look like to you? Okay, that's a popular question. I've mentioned that before in my videos. Many years ago, I was asked this in an executive interview, and the very first time I was asked it, it took me aback because it is so general that if you don't expect it and you haven't prepared for it, it's kind of hard to answer. What they're doing here is they're just seeing that this job is a fit for you. Okay, so if they ask you what is success, to you, and you say, oh well, it's this, job where I do this and this and this, right? That's a problem if that doesn't describe this job. If this is unrelated to that thing that you think is success. Okay, so a good answer there is describing something very similar to the job you're interviewing for. Okay, now if you can't do that, maybe the job you're interviewing for is not a fit. And that would be a red flag to the recruiter. Okay, so those are the super important questions. Obviously, there's a lot more. I know I'm going to hear in the comments from people that there's all these other questions. Yes, I know that. But these are the most important. If you can have great answers for these, and maybe you practice these in preparation, you should probably do really well. Okay, because these are the core. Okay, if you got these covered, the only other things you could get asked are, outlying type things, exceptional questions. Okay, but these are the core. Now they may not be phrased quite like this. Okay, the question, why should we hire you, for example, can be phrased, what are your strengths? Okay, why do you want to work here? Things like that, right? It's essentially the same question. You answer by saying a bunch of positive things about yourself. Same with what is your weakness? You could phrase that a whole bunch of ways, but basically they're fishing for something bad about you. Okay, so if you have these questions down, and if you are aware that they can phrase them a bunch of different ways, you're going to do fine. Okay, so thank you for your attention. Thank you to Alexei for sending this in. Alexei is awesome, and so are you. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video.